After I learned this 3-step system, I was able to create photos with my Sony camera that looked like this. And it's not what you think. Most beginners chase new lenses, new cameras, or presets, but the real fixes are a lot more simple. So if you're tired of getting blurry images when you could have sworn that it was in focus, or shots that look way darker than you thought when you took it, or colors and tones that just seem a bit off, then I've got your back in today's video. I'm gonna show you exactly how to fix those problems with this 3-step system. The essential settings, exposure, and white balance, plus one little trick that almost nobody talks about. I put this to the test when Sony sent me a camera for a collab and gave me just 2 days to deliver, and this system saved me. Anyways, camera's out, let's get into step 1. Okay, so with these settings, we are laying foundations here. If you wanna get the most out of exposure and white balance, arguably the more exciting sections of the video, you gotta understand this stuff. So first things first, in this menu here, you don't have to have the same camera model as me to get these settings dialed in. The menu items I'm gonna be looking at are not incredibly complex. They're gonna be called the same thing, although they might be in like 1 or 2 lines different from the exact spot that I'm in, but I'll go through this relatively slowly so that y'all can keep up and make the adjustments. First thing here in your shooting tab, if you have an older Sony camera menu system, this might be horizontal as opposed to vertical, but in your shooting tab, you're simply going to be looking for a menu item that's called aspect ratio. And in aspect ratio, we have 4 options. You want to make sure that you're in 3x2. Putting up on screen right now the differences between each of these. In short, 3x2 is going to be using your entire sensor. If you want to crop and post for different ratios for different reasons, you can easily do that. For me, I'm always in 3x2 to use my entire sensor. And under your file format, JPEG is for quick turnaround, meaning you don't want to do a bunch. You can do some, but you don't want to do a ton of editing in post. You want a faster turnaround. RAW, typically you're going to be editing those in post. RAW is going to be a bigger file type. It's also going to give you a lot more flexibility of pushing colors and exposure around without losing quality. You push JPEG too far, you're going to lose the colors and tones and exposure will start to kind of fall apart a bit. I'm usually in RAW and JPEG, and that gives me simultaneous shooting where it is capturing both RAWs and JPEG for that shot. Next, for shoot mode, if you have a dial on top of your camera that has auto PASM, then you can be changing your shoot mode with that dial. If you don't have that dial in your menu, under shoot mode, you can change those same things, aperture, shutter, priority, manual mode, or auto, just in the menu system there. So I've got the camera in auto right now, and the challenge with auto is you can get a good shot sometimes, but I'm just going to change my lighting here and I'm going to get really overexposed. But as I change my lighting in this scene, you can see that the camera, it's using the f-stop right now, but it can change the f-stop, the shutter speed, or the ISO when the lighting or the scene is changing alongside of white balance. All things we'll be talking about pretty extensively today. The problem with that is you might get a shot that you like using auto and you're gonna have a hard time identifying why you like it and being able to repeat it. So it's not super reliable. At the same time, I get it. It's fast and there is some value to that, but I promise you, shooting in manual, you can feel as fast as auto with much better results, getting the most out of your camera. So auto, in short, isn't the best because of the changing settings that the camera is doing and sometimes not making the right adjustments for the type of shot that you want. We are going to be in manual for today's video. And if you leave your camera in auto and you try to change some of the settings we go through, you might get blocked out because your camera doesn't have the ability to change some of the settings when it's in auto mode that it does in manual. So kicking over to manual, and that's going to give us complete control over every single setting in the entire camera to adjust how we want to. A few other small changes that I make in my Sony cameras, under your focus tab here. This is a big preference one here, but AF with shutter. If I turn that on, that is the half hold, and I'm pretty sure Sony cameras still come out of box with the half hold to tell the camera to start the autofocus process. I leave that off for me, and that is because what I do, I'm going to go into Operation Customize for a second. We'll come back here shortly. Sounds like a scary menu item. It's really not. So Operation Customize, this one's for video. We want to be in photo. And what I do is the button on your camera that says AF on, if you click that, if it doesn't currently say that, you can go through the menu and remap any of these buttons to anything. So for me, I find the menu item that's AF on, and I map that AF on button to AF on. And simply what that does for me, when I hold that button, it tells the camera to start focus. So that's back button focusing. I don't know, old habits die hard, I guess, but complete preference there. Still on that focus tab here, I'm going to go into our focus area, looking for a menu item that's called focus area. And for photography, I use one of these two exclusively. Wide, it's going to be using the entire frame to try to grab focus on what the camera thinks you want in focus, and you can imagine where those challenges are going to be. With zone, I can tell it where I want it to focus, and I can get a lot more precise by putting simply, if you just look here, I'm just going to cover that. If you just look at that zone there, that white box is the only spot that it's going to be looking for focus. So you can be a little bit more precise in that. I also like using, I'll use that for like portraits or even landscapes or like pretty much anything besides products. Expand spot, this little box here, is the one that I will use for like product shots when I want to get really precise, for example, and get something that's a little bit more of a tight focus spot, and usually, again, pretty good for products. One last little point with focus, still in our focus tab here, usually under the AF/MF slot. Focus mode, we want to be in continuous autofocus. That's going to be the most intuitive as opposed to single. Continuous is going to, let me change my zone here. Continuous is going to be as I'm holding the focus button, it is going to be constantly searching for focus, as opposed to in single shot, for example. In single shot, once it gets focus once, right, I'm still holding the focus button. It's going to keep that one very specific focal point. So continuous autofocus tends to be the most intuitive, especially when you're first starting out. Now, this next step is critical. Okay, we're going to go back into, if I go to my menu here and I go into the toolbox looking for that operation customize option again for camera settings. Okay, we need to have the ability, okay, it's usually down here at the bottom, need to have the ability to remap some of these things to quickly adjust your aperture, shutter speed, and ISO, being of the utmost importance for photography, things you want to have really quick access to and not be fumbling around in your menu. Okay, I have a lot of dials on this specific camera model. If you only, let's say you have a camera that only has like one dial on it and like a wheel, then we'll talk about that very briefly too. But in here, I'm going to always make sure that I have one of my dials set to aperture, so that I'll find an easy one for you guys to see where that's highlighted there in this back dial here. Again, anything that you click, all right, so I'm going to go back to this first one. It's my front dial. You can see that tiny little bit of orange highlighter there. I click that, you can go through the entire menu and you're looking for something that says aperture, and it's going to come across as AV. The next one, you want to have a dial that is designated to shutter speed, represented by TV. And then I like having this wheel here set to ISO. So now in my camera, I have a really quick ability to adjust my shutter speed, I can adjust my aperture, and I can adjust my ISO with those three dials. Now, if you have a camera that doesn't have a ton of dials, maybe you just have one and a wheel, here's what I do for those cameras. I'm going to set one of them to either aperture or shutter speed. Okay, either aperture or shutter speed. And then I'm going to take this wheel and we're going to set that one to the other one that you didn't set the dial to, right? So if I had maybe one dial here and I set that to aperture, I'm going to take this wheel, because all of your Sony cameras will have that wheel, and I would set that to shutter speed. And then what I would do is up on this setting up here where you press down on the wheel to the right and it says ISO on your camera, we would simply be remapping that one to ISO, right? And that way, when you're in camera here, you have one dial designated to aperture. You can spin the wheel to change your shutter speed, and then when you push right on the wheel, you have a quick menu pop up here for your ISO. So still a pretty quick way to do that. And boom, just like that, we're one step closer to you having the ability to create amazing photos with your Sony camera. Getting into step 2, it's going to be all about exposure. The goal with exposure is really straightforward. We're trying to make sure that our images aren't too bright, They're not too dark that they're just right. But to do that, we have to understand a few things about aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. Shutter speed rule. Here's where shutter speed's important. If you want sharp photos, you have to understand some shutter speed rules. Sharp photos comes back to your ability to get focus. With these Sony cameras these days, that is pretty hard to screw up in autofocus. But once it's in focus, if you want sharp photos, and you're not getting sharp photos, and your autofocus is good, it's because your shutter speed is probably incorrect. So with that, you want to freeze motion essentially. And we always think about motion as like a fast moving subject. Like I want to like freeze that car going by. So I got to think about these shutter speeds. It's also just even micro jitters of you hand holding the camera. That little bit of motion with the wrong shutter speed can create a blurry outcome. So first things first, slow moving subjects like walking or portraits. I shoot portraits at 1/125 or higher, but it's a good rule of thumb to err on the high side. But shutter speed for slow moving subjects like somebody walking or just kind of sitting still with a little bit of movement is 1/250 to 1/500. Somewhere as that is like your lowest shutter speed that you would use. Faster moving subjects, like running, not like sprinting, but like running speeds, 1/1000. Very fast moving subjects like higher speed sports that are faster than like running speeds. Birds, fast cars, 1/2000 of a second or faster. This is a good one too, like hummingbird wings, water splashes, golf balls, golf clubs, that type of thing, 1/4000 or faster is what you're going to need to completely freeze motion and get a sharp shot. You take a look at this shot that I took here, for example, is this guy was rock climbing, and I had so he was moving maybe like a walking pace, maybe a little bit slower. I had it at you can look here, I pulled the raw data for you guys, but I had that at 1/1600 for that shot. So it's definitely going to freeze motion because it's faster than like 1/500 that we just looked at for that type of shot. At some point too, you can use the main takeaway is like don't go lower than the ones I just showed you on screen, but you can absolutely go higher. Right? You're going to use shutter speed for like brightness and exposure and stuff too, that we will take a look at. Show you a bad example. This is a good example, but my girlfriend Savannah, that you'll see again later, you can see here I took that at 1/4000. She was actually doing like a full like fast-paced pickleball swing, and we completely freezed motion, right? Even the paddle in her arm that's moving the fastest, we froze motion. Fast moving subject, 1/4000. And here's what it looks like at the wrong shutter speed. That's 1/80. It was in focus. Nothing's in focus because it's just blurry, but you can see her paddle. You can see the motion blur there, so it's not sharp. But also she's actually not even, seems like she's not in focus. She is. It's just that she was moving too, and the shutter wasn't opening and closing and opening fast enough to actually like freeze motion. Okay, so shutter speed is pretty important, but let's take a look some additional things with shutter speed here, and then we'll kind of come back. But you guys are probably noticing though as well is that as I increase, go back to f2.8 here on my aperture, but back on shutter speed, as I increase the shutter speed number, the darker the image gets. Okay, and the lower I make it, this is like, these numbers would be like astrophotography, or if you want a crazy amount of blur, you almost never use these. But the lower it is, the brighter the image, and the darker it is, the darker the image. So what aperture does, which is our f-stop down here, is the lower the number, the more blur that you'll have here in the background. Like my hand is blurred out when this subject here is in focus. What it also does is lower aperture numbers are going to make your image overall brighter. So as I bring this f-stop number, increase that number, it's clearly darkening the image, and to account for that, I'll probably need to bring my ISO way up to get some kind of proper exposure. What you're seeing though at a higher f-stop is the blur back there completely went away. So lower f-stop numbers, the brighter the image there, obviously, and the more blur that you get, and the higher the number, the darker the image, and the less blur that you'll get. And last but certainly not least, let's take a look at ISO. ISO is going to be the number next to ISO, and it's going to brighten the image the higher the number gets. Does come with some trade-offs though. The lower the number, the less grain, color grain, color noise will come into play. Let me show you an example of that. I'm just going to bring my f-stop really high so that we have to be at a higher ISO to get proper exposure. I'm actually going to even break the rule here and bring my shutter speed really high to really darken this image up and get a super high ISO. This camera is maxed out right now at 102,000, which you would almost never use for a ISO setting, but when it's that high, you'll get a tremendous amount of grain, where we at some grain and so forth in the shadows, and overall the image is going to look really soft and just generally bad. So the lower the ISO, the better. You got to do your best to try to get a lower ISO number depending upon your lighting and other circumstances, but when in doubt, get a low ISO. If you need to use ISO to get the image exposed properly, meaning like brightening the ISO to get proper exposure, at the end of the day, proper exposure is going to look good, even if there is a little bit of grain. The method I use to get repeatable exposure results with my Sony camera is an in-camera little setting that's called zebras. And right before I show you everything about zebras, a common question I get is, well, can't I just eyeball it? The short answer is no, especially when you're first starting out. Over time, like an educated version of eyeballing it can be completely useful and totally fine, but zebras are going to give you a foolproof way to make sure that you are a bit more scientific. Don't worry, it's not that complicated, but a bit more scientific to get desirable exposure results. A lot of times when you're eyeballing it, depending upon the conditions that you're in, maybe it's really bright, or your screen's too bright, or your screen's not bright enough, and you take a shot that looked right, and then when you get it in post, it looks like really dark. So this is going to be a rhythmic and systematic way to get repeatable, there's that word again, but repeatable exposure results every single time. So step one, we have to understand how zebras work in the first place. Like, what are they even doing? And just a quick note, I'm going to be showing you guys for zebra displays. It's way easier for me to show you this and way easier for you guys to see when I'm using the MNC app on a Sony camera. So I'm going to show that to you in this Sony MNC app, and you can see zebras there. They show up clearly. It's very easy for you guys to see what I'm giving you commentary about or talking about. The only downside to showing it to you this way, so please take note of this, is the interface here is different, but it's a direct reflection of what's happening in my camera. Like if I'm in my camera, on my camera, and I connect it to the app, it sees what the lens sees, obviously. But if I change, it says iris here, that's aperture. If I change on the camera, this f6.3, and I change it down to like f5.6, it would just reflect that on the app. So in the zebra displays and like how the zebra levels and how I get those versus what it looks like in the camera are a little bit different. But it's the same exact things in the app that I'm showing that are called the same thing and do the same things in the back of your camera. Okay, so where zebras exist in your camera, again, I do custom map these, but there's where they are on the menu is usually under your exposure. There's going to be something that says zebra display, and there's just two options. Okay, so you can have your zebras actually on so that you're seeing them on the back of your camera. If it's off, that's why you're not seeing them. And then zebra level. There's a lot here, but I'm going to tell you guys, and I'll show you an example here in a second. Stay away from standard range. I will explain why shortly. You can change that to lower limit, and all of these presets here in the camera, these are actually lower limit. They're not standard range. So it's what Sony likes, it's what I like. I'd encourage you guys to not use standard range, and you can just toggle that when you're in your custom numbers here. It's a lower limit, and then you can simply change the value, and you can even get a little bit lower down to like 50 here, as opposed to the presets, the lowest that they go is 70. So that's a way you can get a little bit lower. But we'll talk a lot about that, but I want you guys to get that really sunk in, is that like lower limit's the way to go, because standard range is going to confuse this entire process. Very simply speaking, here's what zebras are telling us. Okay? So they're telling us what value or what in the frame is hitting a value. Okay, so I'm just going to actually make all those zebras just disappear for a second if I can. They're still down there. Okay, so the zebra levels that I have set right now is 70. Okay, so what it's saying, and let me just slowly start to introduce some right now. Okay, so the very bottom of the frame, that's saying that down there, that light reflection is at or above 70. Let me bring it back up, and now they're gone, so nothing in the frame is hitting the value of 70. This is all going to make sense, I promise you. As you start to increase the lightness or the brightness of this example frame, we start to see zebras showing up. And what they're now telling us is that anything in the frame that is at or above, and that's where lower limit comes into play. It tells us when it's starting to show up, it's at 70, and when it's showing up even further, it's like probably above 70. I'll show you how to make that more precise. I'm going to introduce some fake light here via ISO to say, okay, now what is happening here is that there's a lot of stuff in the frame that is at or above 70. Okay, so simply speaking, zebras are just telling us, depending on what value you set them to, when they're appearing on something in the frame, that thing in the frame is either hitting that value or it's above that value. And we're going to just make that way more precise right now and how we can use that for consistent, repeatable exposure. And one thing that we want to be doing with that too is I want you guys to try to start to train your eye. Let's say that this skin tone here, which actually should be exposed to 70, I'd say that's my example or my target, like what I want to hit 70. I want you guys to start to get really good, and I'm going to go ahead and just make all these disappear here for a second. I want you guys to get really good at only focusing on the thing you're trying to have hit the number, be at that number. Okay, so let me just show you what I mean. If our target, again, for that top skin tone, the one up here, if that target is 70, I see zebras elsewhere. My mind's not even looking at them. It's not a non-issue. They're not even on my mind. My goal is to try to get zebras to just barely start to show up. And right now they're kind of flirting with it. I'll make it a little bit more obvious. Get to the point where they're just barely showing up on that target. And then I'll usually pull back by, in this case, I just went one click of ISO. Again, higher ISO is going to brighten our image. Lower the ISO is going to darken our image. So I'm just using ISO here. No zebras on my target. I'm going to slowly increase my ISO until they're just barely showing up. And then I'm going to pull back by one click of ISO. And what that is telling me, if my target here is to get that exposed to the numerical value of 70, and my in-camera zebras are set to 70, and it's saying in the frame that anything at or above 70 is showing up with zebras, well, then I can be pretty sure that right now, when there's no zebras on that target, that it's not at 70. And right about here, there's starting to barely be some, so it's probably right at 70. So when I definitely am just absolutely starting to see them and I pull back by one click, it's safe to say that that is exposed near at 70. What you don't want to do is be like, oh, there's zebras on it, so it must be at 70. No, that's no good. You're trying to find that point when they're just barely showing up. Okay, and you pull back by one click, and now I can absolutely say that that target is exposed to the numerical value of 70. The other stuff in the frame doesn't really matter to me in terms of what those numerical values are. I just want my thing I'm trying to expose properly to be able to hit that number. And then step 2 is just identifying, like, now that we know how zebras kind of work, is like, well, what do we even expose things to? Like, what do we set zebra values to? Understand this chart. If you understand this chart, if you don't take anything else away from this video, to understand this chart and how to use zebras to get these values in your frame. It took me forever to figure this out. I'm embarrassed how long it took, but yeah, self-taught. Which hopefully helps me give you guys this stuff in a more palatable format that makes more sense to you. A zebra value, as an example of 100, that equals in your frame something that is pure white or the brightest highlight. A zebra value of 90, that equals like a bright white with a little bit of detail in the highlight, so not completely blown out. 80, ideal detail and highlights, think like the sky, that you can see almost everything that's up there if the sky is exposed to exactly 80. These skin tone ones are ones that we're going to use a pretty good amount today, although I will show you examples without skin tone. The pale white skin tone should be exposed to 70. Average white skin tone should be 60. Tan white or light black skin tone should be exposed to 50. Dark black skin tones to 40. And there's also like 70 is light gray and 40 is like exact medium dark gray. Between 40 and 50 is like that middle-ish gray kind of space. Understand that, because the next part here is that the lower limit on your camera zebra displays match those numbers perfectly. So if I tell my lower limit in my camera, I want to see things at or above 90, particularly at is kind of the key there, but I want to see things on the frame. Show me zebras on things that are at or above 90. That is the exact same as the 90 here in this chart. So we're just understanding what things need to be the perfect value to in a frame in conjunction with setting our lower limit of zebras to get the indicators to show up. And that's how we can systematically get the same exact exposure every single time. So now that y'all know what some of those numbers are, we can just use this example again to start to play with that a bit. How I'm changing the numbers here on this app is, again, it's the same exact thing that y'all will be doing in your camera, just a little bit of a different interface. I'm gonna just change those all the way down. So let's go to 50. Okay. So same thing here. If I'm trying to expose like a darker black skin tone to the numerical value of 50, okay, and let's say that my starting point I should go the opposite direction for you guys. Let's say that we're really bright. And well, we know that what the zebras are telling us right now is that there's a lot of stuff in the frame that is at or above 50, but I'm trying to get, this is way too bright, but I'm trying to get my darker black skin tone as my target here as the example to be exactly at 50. So I'm going to be bringing my ISO down. And there's two ways that I'm going to actually show you guys a couple things. Okay, so I'm bringing my ISO down until that dark black skin tones look like the zebras just barely disappeared, right? So there they are barely showing up, and it looks like 500 would be that exposure value. 500 would be the ISO to try to get that darker black skin tone to be exposed to 50, which makes sense. Let me go back down here and bring my ISO down. Another way that you could do that is, let's say for some reason that you wanted to have a higher, like no blur in the background, okay? Well, you could also do that with your f-stop by bringing your f-stop number up, which we know is going to darken the image, okay? And it looks like those zebras are just barely showing up at f3.2 and they just barely disappear at f3.5. And now that is back to exposed to 50 with a different ISO value, but with less blur in the background. And then the third, like step 3 with exposure here, is prioritize a subject in the frame. It's like a subject of exposure. As an example, this shot here, I put my zebra level to 70. And I wanted the brightest part, which is probably like right here, of Savannah's skin tone to just have zebras barely showing up on it. And I knew that her skin tone was exposed properly. And that's what I wanted to prioritize in this shot was I don't want her skin to be way too bright or way too dark. I want her skin to be looking like skin because that would make the shot look good, right? And then I didn't really care what the zebras were doing up here. I didn't care. Like they've been looking at these like pure white. These are kind of blown out. They're probably at or above 100, but I wanted to make sure that her skin tone was just right. Whatever else is going to happen depends upon how I frame it, where the light's at, or whatever those values are going to be. If I would have exposed up here to like 100 or maybe like slightly less than 100, the shot would have looked like this as opposed to that, right? So you can just see the difference here is that you want to prioritize something, the subject in the frame that you want to get the proper exposure on. As an example though, like a contrasting example, the subject of exposure here was actually more so the skyline. I wanted there to be some highlight detail here, so it's exposed to 85-ish, maybe 90. And I knew that I was going to be making my skin tone here. This is absolutely not exposed to 70. This is way darker, but I wanted that silhouette style shot. And for me to achieve that, if I just exposed behind me in this case to those highlights back there, I would have created that silhouette type of shot while showing the details in the highlights and of the sky, which ends up being the subject of exposure, albeit maybe me on top of the car here is maybe the subject of the actual shot. That's going to cover exposure. We just got one more thing to look at, and arguably the most underrated, maybe my favorite topic here, and that is going to be white balance. And look, I know my shirt is changing a lot in this video, and that's because some of the lessons I'm showing you guys are directly from my Better Sony Photos in 90 Minutes workshop. And some of the clips are just from today where I've condensed some of those lessons because I realized that there's a lot of detail in that workshop. If you're into those finer details, or you want to see me teaching in a longer format, or you still have questions like, hey, what about aperture and shutter priority? How do you use those? How do I expose for multiple skin tones? Or maybe you want to see me go through my A to Z process, settings, white balance, and exposure, this 3-step system for like a product shot, an interview shot, or a landscape shot. I cover all of that in that 90-minute workshop, and you could check it out in the link down below and use the code YT20 if you want to save 20%. Okay, next lesson, and this is an important one if you want your colors and tones to look good. So the goal with white balance 99% of the time is to get true white, because when you have true white, as you can see here, the other colors and tones are going to look natural, which is the majority of what we identify as like a good looking image. When you don't have true white, maybe it's too blue or too warm, the other colors and tones are going to be all jacked up. So we're trying to get true white to make our images, colors, and tones look good. And when I go in camera here, and we're looking at auto white balance, which is what your camera comes out of box in. The challenge with auto white balance is even in controlled environments, first off, it doesn't always get it right. And second off, the colors and tones are going to kind of shift around a little bit, which if you want consistency amongst your shots, that's obviously going to create a problem. If you're shooting in RAW, you can save that in post and you can kind of resync them. It's one extra step that I don't think is necessary. I think a lot of people avoid some of these maybe more custom set options for white balance because they maybe seem a little bit confusing. Like this one down here looks crazy. Like I don't know what that stuff is. Right? I do. Got your back. But it's like it looks kind of crazy. And so we avoid these things and just think the camera's going to get autocorrect. And honestly, this is, again, one of the biggest underrated things to understand about your camera if you want to have good looking images. We want to set a white balance that simply doesn't shift around like auto white balance is going to be constantly assessing and trying to shift the image. There's a few ways that you can do that. These presets are actually really good. This daylight one, if you're outside and it's sunny and there's no clouds, and that's a fantastic white balance to choose, and all your shots are going to be consistent. Same thing for shade, and you can see what these are doing just in this scene that we're looking at here. And this scene is daylight balanced, which is why these tones look good. And then when we shift one of these presets, it looks a little bit too warm and things start to get a little bit funky. But shade can be good if you're in shade. Cloudy is relatively similar to shade. But cloudy, if you're in a cloudy environment, then that one can be great. Incandescent and the tungsten or the fluorescent options, those are usually used for indoors, as you can see the crazy adjustment that's happening here. I don't love using those. There's actually a better way to get true white because indoors the lighting can be really mixed, and I like using one of these two options, especially when I'm indoors, although it's good for a lot of situations. Just to adjust white balance, if I go into my menu, I can go into a color and tone tab. So find color and tone, and right above color and tone is white balance, and then just a simple white balance setting here. Once you click that, you can go in. Your camera's probably out of box in auto white balance. We want to scroll down here to this manual set for white balance. And then we're going to kind of mess around with these temperature settings here in just 1 second. And one thing that you want to do is I'm going to be using today this white card, but you can pick up like a $10 one on Amazon. I'll try to remember to put a link over there, and someone tag me if I forget. You don't have to get one like these. These are way overpriced. You could also use a white piece of paper. Just make sure it has no wrinkles in it because those little shadows will actually kind of make a difference. And method here is you want to get your exposure of the scene before doing what I'm about to show you, and make sure that your white card is facing the main light source. Before you do this too, those things being very important to get this right. But let's take a look, just changing my key light intensity. Let's go to like a tungsten light for this shot here. I'm gonna go like a tungsten light. We'll go like way down, and I'm gonna bring the intensity up a little bit too. That way we're exposed somewhere close. Okay, right about there is probably good. So for this type of scene, for example, obviously it's like an orange light situation, at least this being the subject, for example. There's a bunch of different light tones in here today. But this being the subject that what I want to show you guys how to get white balance. Okay, so the main light source that's lighting the subject is this really orange light. So what you can do, the overall goal, and I'll show you this in a few different ways, but the overall goal is that you're going to want to adjust your white balance value. Right now is 5600 Kelvin. I'm going to bring it way up here, and then let's kind of go way down here as well. What I want you guys to try to do is your goal is to simply just make that white card look white with these values. Don't worry about the numbers. It's maybe like a later day, but as we start to get a lot lower here, we're starting to see that white card is now looking a lot more pure white. Right now at about 3800, which is pretty close to the main light source value that I just set here. But that's the overall goal. Like, let's say that my light source is at 5600. Well, now that is too blue. So we're just going to counter that by increasing this number. And we don't want to go too far because now it's kind of like too warm and orange. We're just trying to find the value of Kelvin here to where that white card looks pure white, and that's your white balance. And here's an example of that white card method, just outside in like a landscape type of shot. And just if you pay, it's like a sliver down here. I should have done better, but that's green, that's grass. Bricks will be the color of brick. But right now that white card looks way too blue. It's way too blue. We know it's not pure white. And I'm just going to be adjusting in camera to my Kelvin settings. I'm just going to be manually adjusting the Kelvin until that white card looks white. If we haven't already, I will show you how to use a custom set in the camera to have it kind of find something that's pure white or pure gray and like snap the shot of it, and it'll internally calibrate to that. You need to know how to do that, and you also need to know how to do it just by looking at a white reference and getting pure white to your eyeball. Both of those things are important because you can't always guarantee you're going to have a target to be able to hit, or hit to the like zoom length or something. That, anyways, you need both. So I'm just adjusting this in camera until that white looks pure white to my eye, locking it in. So I'm about to show you that part now. But anyways, I'm adjusting this until that white looks pure white, and then once it looks pure white to my eye, which we can all agree that does, look at the greens look good, the brick looks like brick, exactly what we wanted it to look like, and that white looks pure white, and so you can eyeball that, and that will take you a very long way. You can also use a tool in the camera to get perfect white balance. Let's take a look at that right now. I'm sure you have one of these gray caps that came with your camera. You can actually use this because it is a neutral gray. You can use this to lock in your white balance. Just make sure that your scene is exposed properly with that gray cap facing the main light source. And then once you do that, it's pretty straightforward. You're going to go back into your white balance menu settings. We were just here earlier, but you can go into one of these, doesn't matter which one. Let's just go to number 1. I'm going to push to the right where it says to set. Once I click on set, it gives me this movable box, and all we're going to do, we're just going to put that movable box directly on the gray cap, and we're going to hit our center button, and that's going to say, hey, perfect white balance for this is 5600 Kelvin, and we're just going to It captured that white balance. Just going to lock that in with the OK button, and now we have perfect white balance for the scene. And this is the part that almost nobody talks about, or at least makes it like formalizing it to be so simple to where it's going to click for you. And when I first show you this, you're going to be like, well, why not just show us that sooner and make this video like 5 minutes long? The reason for that is you can't, although what I'm about to show you is amazing and it's really fast and it's going to get your exposure and white balance quick, you can't always rely on it. So you need to know how to do things like setting exposure to like a skin tone or eyeballing a white reference card to get the right white balance. You need to have those tools in your tool belt because you will need them sometimes. However, when this works out, it's pretty great. You can get a lot done with a white piece of paper, or in this case, I'm just using one of those affordable white balance cards from Amazon that, if I haven't said yet, I will link down below. Check this out. The first thing I'm going to do, and I might actually boost my lighting here again and get into me being super overexposed here, but it's going to help me out for this scene a little bit. Okay, the first thing we want to do is get the exposure of that white card. Back to my chart, I know that I want that to be at about 90, maybe slightly less than 90. Yeah, I've got my zebra level set to exactly 90, and all that I'm going to be doing, now let's just start out like really low here so we can go through this together. All that I'm going to be doing is, maybe it's a shot where I want to make sure that I'm freezing motion at 250. All that I'm going to be doing in this case is bringing up my ISO. I could also do this with lighting, but just for the sake of teaching this, bringing up my ISO until zebras are just starting to appear on that white card. I know you can't see it, but right now the zebras are just barely starting to appear. I'm going to pull back by 1 click. They're still slightly there. I'm going to pull back by 2 clicks, and that would be my exposure for the scene. I now know that that white card is set to just below 90. Next, when you go into your white balance, you can quickly go back into that custom set, the thing we just looked at for the gray card. This works on a white reference card too. Go to set after it is exposed properly and making sure it's in the same lighting that the scene will be in. I'm going to click that. It's going to get the proper white balance, and it locked that in at 6100. I'm going to hit OK. And now, literally anything in that scene that's in the same lighting is exposed properly with the correct white balance. Whether that's one of those skin tones there, let me get focused, whether that's a skin tone, whether that is a darker product like a camera, whether that's a lighter product like this drone, right? Whether it's my skin tone, like everything in that scene that we just got has the proper white balance and exposure. So if you get it for one thing, you get it for all things. Wildly valuable little tools. And with that, welcome to way better photo results out of your Sony camera. You're gonna love it here. Don't forget to use the code YT20. You can check that workshop out right here. And if you're a hybrid shooter, meaning you want to crush it with both photo and video with your camera, you want to check out this video right here. I dive into my simple system to get better videos with your Sony camera. Anyways, see you in the next video. Take care. See ya.